Energy Committee, Angus McNeal.
Thank you very much. Chair, just before we go on to that, Prime Minister, there was a view, and I'm sure you've heard it, of many across the world, millions if not billions, I think Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza. I don't want to get into that debate here, but what I do want to mention is the ceasefire. On the 15th of November, when we voted in the House of Commons, and you didn't vote for the ceasefire, there were 11,200 people dead in Gaza. A month later, there's now 19,000 dead in Gaza. 16 times were killed on the 17th of October in the terrorist outrage, on the 7th of October, sorry, in the terrorist outrage. It is 5.5 times what were killed in Northern Ireland in 30 years. Isn't it time that you did put your voice behind the other hundreds of countries in the world that are shouting for a ceasefire?
I think I addressed this in a question just last week in Parliament, where I said we've been consistent in calling for sustained humanitarian pauses or indeed a sustainable ceasefire. But that has to be one that, as we've talked about before, has the conditions for it to be genuinely sustainable. And that means hostages have to be released and Hamas needs to not be firing rockets into Israel. Its stated aim is destroying Israel. So those are conditions of what a sustainable ceasefire is. And we are having that conversation with other colleagues around the world, but as I've said very clearly, no one wants this conflict to go on for a moment longer than is necessary, but it's important that ceasefire is sustainable, and those are some of the underlying conditions that are necessary for it to be so.
Viewers will see you as an outlier probably in the world stage there, but turning to COP26, one speech, some hours in Dubai, not as much as other leaders. I know you've defended that one, but that combined with your reverses in cars and domestic boilers, on the change in the carbon budgets, are you serious about global warming, or you think it's just political positioning prior to the next election?
Yes, I am serious about tackling it, and I'm very proud of the UK's record. So we've decarbonised faster than any other major economy since the baseline in 1990 by about 50%. You can compare that to Germany 40-odd, France 20-odd, and the US hasn't dropped at all. And going forward, if you look at our NDC, our nationally determined contribution for 2035,
I'm okay. Again, I don't need to go any further forward.
You've asked a question, am I serious about it?
Question,
the seriousness is demonstrated in our commitments, which again, at 68%, to 2035, more ambitious than the EU at 55, more ambitious than Australia at 45, more ambitious than the US at 40.
Reading out statistics is fine, Prime Minister, but I want to move on to energy prices, which are going up, affecting my constituents in the Hilling and Near and everybody else's constituents. It's not much of a market forces you have when companies are being protected by the regulator to put up domestic prices because they say it's unpaid bills, but they're making huge profits. British Gas has reported profits of 969 million for the first six months of 2023, 900% up from the same period of 2022. The French state-owned EDF is making an absolute fortune in the UK with profits of about 2 billion. Scottish Power has seen their profits up as well, E.ON too. Aren't you just giving blank cheques to power companies through the structure of the energy market?
So no, I think it's interesting. The first question is about saying you're walking back, which we're not, from targets on various things, on boilers and cars. And the next question is about the impact on consumer bills, right? So what we've done is...
The impact on consumer bills is due to allowing the regulator to raise the price for profitable companies. Enhancing profits, Prime Minister. That's what that is. So
I'm getting onto that, but I do think the impact on household finance is important, which is why my approach to net zero, and I get that you disagree with this, is one which is pragmatic. Because I care about the impact on family finances. So where there were opportunities to save,
if you do, where there are opportunities, is this price gap going to rise?
Where there are opportunities to save families £5,000, £10,000, £15,000 by adopting a more pragmatic approach to net zero, keeping us internationally leading, but doing that in a proportionate way, I think that's the right thing to do to ease the cost of living pressures on families. Now, alongside that, I implemented a windfall tax on energy companies that is 75%, and we have used the money from that tax, which is one of the highest in the world on energy companies, to help pay around half of a typical family's energy bill over the past year. So that's what we've done. 75% windfall tax on energy companies, use that money to help pay for around half of a typical family's energy bill, and adopted a more pragmatic approach to net zero, which is saving families thousands of pounds,
in the UK,
because I think that's important.
I mean, British workers, according to the Resolution Foundation, are missing out on about 10,700 a year after a decade of weak economic growth, which you're in government for a large part and Chancellor of the Exchequer for a good part. and the living standards gap is about 8,300 between typical households in Britain and their peers in Australia, Canada, France, Germany and the Netherlands. Combined with that, poorer households are about £4,300 worse off than the French and German counterparts. That's a pretty damning indictment of where you've taken the economy, isn't it, Prime Minister? Both as Prime Minister and Chancellor, and you're generally your time in office.
I think what you failed to mention in your setup was the fact that we've.
Can you address the points I did mention? Because I don't want you to go on another tangent.
I'm just answering a question, which I think I am allowed to do. But if you're going to talk about the economy and the impact of living standards without mentioning the fact that we had a once-in-a-century pandemic, which caused the biggest recession we've had.
But so did Germany, France, the Netherlands, Australia and Canada and other countries already.
And on top of that, a massive shock to energy bills because
of
the war in Ukraine. And indeed, Germany's economy is in recession this year. Ours is not.
Why are their wages on average then 10,700 a year better than the UK's? Given all you've said and all this world stuff, the UK is unique in this, and they've all suffered these things you've mentioned.
All of Europe has suffered a negative impact on their living standards. We're not alone in that, because all of Europe have seen their energy bills rise. So in all your stats, what you have to accept is if energy bills are going up across Europe, that's having an impact on everyone's bills across Europe. We're not alone in that. But what we have done is provide an enormous amount of support to people to help them get through it. And actually, again, in your international comparisons, we've had the fastest recovery from the pandemic out of any major European nation because of my track record and what the government did during the pandemic.
Final point, Prime Minister. Currently, the Republic of Ireland is in a surplus of about £10 billion. The Scottish Government are having a £1.5 billion shortfall. What are the broad shoulders of the UK? Isn't independence doing better for Ireland than being in the UK is for Scotland?
Well, the Scottish Government has received record funding from the UK government.
Not as much as the Irish government, but clearly they're independent.
Again, just to answer the question, both the block grant and the most recent autumn statement mean that the Scottish Government is receiving a record amount of money from the UK Government. On top of that, the UK Government is investing directly in Scottish communities through the Levelling Up Fund and other such areas. And the UK Government is now cutting taxes for Scottish families, kicking in January. Now, obviously, if the Scottish Government has chosen to make different choices, that's for them, but we're very clear that we want to cut taxes for Scottish families because that's how we can help them with the cost of living, and we're able to do that because we're managing the economy well.
Liam Byrne for Business and Trade.
Afternoon, Prime Minister. I just want to follow up some of those questions. So, this Christmas,